about 20 days of sailing from the coasts of Persia, in the vast sea, there is Kalidan Island. It was once ruled by the powerful and wealthy Sultan Sharon, who had a handsome son, Prince Qamar. He was so handsome that the poets had composed many verses in his honor, and all the girls of the kingdom dreamed of his handsome face. When the prince had reached the age of 18, his father said to him, "My son, the time has come to marry. You will seek a beautiful, wise, and noble maiden and get married." But Qamar did not want to marry. He was still so young, and then he thought women were all deceitful and accustomed only to beautiful clothes, ornaments, and 1,000 other frivolities. The Sultan was very sorry to see his son so opposed to marriage and decided to give him a year to think about it. After a year, Sharon called his son and asked him, "Qamar, have you finally decided to get married?" "No, my father," replied the prince. "I have no intention of getting married. I told you already a year ago, and I repeat it to you. I will never get married." Faced with such obstinacy, the old man went on a rampage and ordered the guards to lock him up in an ancient tower near the palace, with only one servant at his service. However, Qamar did not regret his captivity at all. The room was small but comfortable. He had nice clothes and many books to read to pass the time. When evening arrived, he lit the lantern and had the servant bring him something to eat. After the meal, he laid down on the bed and fell asleep. You all should know that in that tower there was a well, which was the home of a fairy called Maymunah. It was about midnight when Maymunah left the well to go flying in the woods. Seeing the light of a lantern, she asked herself, "Who's in the tower? Nobody lives there except me." Intrigued, she entered the room and saw Qamar sleeping on the bed. "What a splendor!" she exclaimed. "He's the most beautiful creature I have ever seen. Judging by the clothes and ornaments, he's certainly a prince." Maymunah could not take her eyes off Qamar and remained a few minutes admiring him while he slept. Finally, she leaned over him, kissed him on the forehead without waking him up, and took flight to the woods. Meanwhile, in far-off China, something similar to what I just told you was happening. Here lived Princess Budur, so beautiful that her father, King Gayur, had built 7 palaces for her to give such beauty the right setting. The first was made of crystal, the second of bronze, the third of steel, the fourth of marble, the fifth of precious stones, the 6th of silver, the 7th of solid gold. When Budur came of age, the king wanted her to marry and began to introduce her to a large number of suitors. But alas, the princess did not wish to marry and refused them all. "Sire," said Budur to her father, "I don't care about marrying at all. I'm fine. Besides, husbands always want to be in charge, and I'm not going to let myself be commanded." One day, King Gayur introduced his daughter to yet another suitor, richer and more powerful than those who have, hitherto, come to ask for her hand. "Father," said Budur angrily, "don't talk to me about this wedding any more. Otherwise, I will stab myself with a dagger and thereby escape your insistence." "My daughter," replied the enraged king, "you are unreasonable, and I will treat you as such. You will be locked in your room until you change your mind." He then had her locked up in an apartment in the Silver Palace, giving her only 2 ladies to serve her and keep her company. let's go back to the island of Kalidan and the fairy Maymunah. She was flying high above the trees in the woods when she suddenly struck another flying creature that nearly made her fall to the ground. It was the Genie Dahnash, an old acquaintance. "Dahnash, damn you!" exclaimed the fairy. "Why don't you pay more attention when you fly?" "Forgive me, valiant Maymunah," said the genie. "I was distracted and then... it's so dark." "Where are you coming from? And what news do you tell me?" Maymunah asked. "I am now returning from far China, where a beautiful princess named Budur lives," Dahnash replied. "Think, the father had her locked up in a building because she doesn't want to take a husband. Believe me, there is no more beautiful creature in the world, and I do not miss one day to go to contemplate her incomparable beauty." Maymunah burst into loud laughter and added, "You wouldn't say that if you had seen the prince I met at the tower. He has the most beautiful face of anyone else in the world." No, said Dahnash. "I tell you that no one is more beautiful than the Chinese princess." "And I repeat to you that the prince of the tower is even more beautiful," insisted Maymunah. They started an excited dispute and were about to start a fight when Dahnash made a proposal. "I will go to China, put the princess to sleep and bring her here. We will compare her to your prince and see which of the two is truly the most beautiful." Maymunah agreed and went to the tower to wait for Dahnash's return. After a short time, Dahnash returned, carrying with him the beautiful sleeping Budur. They placed her next to Prince Qamar, who was also asleep, and began to admire and compare them silently. At one point, Dahnash broke the silence. "What did I tell you? My princess is more beautiful than your prince. Do you still doubt it?" "And you ask me?" replied Maymunah. "Of course I doubt it. He is the most handsome prince." And they began to animatedly discuss the beauty of the two young people. Meanwhile, near the tower, Dimiryat, the king of genies, was flying quietly. Hearing the shrill voices of the two who were arguing, he approached and, taken by curiosity, entered the room. "What's going on here?" he asked. "And what is the reason for your dispute?" Dahnash bowed to his king and told him the whole story. "Look at this couple," Maymunah said to Dimiryat, "and tell us, without partiality, who wins in beauty, the prince or the princess?" Dimiryat looked at the couple for a few minutes, then shook his head and said, "I confess that I would not be sincere if I told you that one is more beautiful than the other. The more I look at them, the more I find them both beautiful. These two young people are very similar, and I think they should get married. Let's put them to the test. Wake them up one at a time, and make sure they notice each other. No sooner said than done. Dahnash turned into a flea and stung Qamar on the neck, who awoke with a start. The prince was very amazed to see a sleeping young woman beside him. "What a charm! What a wonderful girl!" he exclaimed. "Who are you? Show me your eyes," he said, shaking her arm. But Budur didn't wake up because Dahnash had made her sleep heavy. "Maybe it's the bride my father chose for me," thought Qamar. "And with the intention of giving me a surprise, he had her brought here without my knowledge. I would be delighted to be able to marry her." The princess had a very valuable ring on her finger. Qamar took it off and instead placed his as a token of love. That done, he lay down beside Budur and went back to sleep. Now, it was Maymunah's time to turn into a flea and sting Budur on her lips. The princess, waking up, was very surprised to see a beautiful sleeping young man beside her. She was so surprised that she didn't even notice that she was not in her silver palace, but in another palace. "What beauty! Who is this young man, as beautiful as the moon?" she said in amazement. "So my father brought the handsome young man to marry me. I would not have been so long without a husband if he had introduced me to him before. I'd be very happy to marry him." She shook him with her hand to wake him up, but due to Dahnash's magic, Qamar continued to sleep. Budur noticed the ring that the prince had on his finger. "How strange! It's the same as mine," she thought. And looking at her hand, she noticed that she had a man's ring. How could such an exchange of rings have happened? She wondered in amazement. Certainly, this is proof of the love that binds me to this handsome young man. Then she kissed Qamar and fell asleep again. fairy and the two invisible genies had silently observed the scene. Then Dimiryat said, "Well, we have proof that the two love each other. You, Dahnash, take Princess Budur back to where she came from. If they really love each other and plan to marry, they will do anything to see each other again." Dahnash obeyed the order and brought Budur back to China. Maymunah and Dimiryat said goodbye and resumed their flight to the woods, each on their way. The next morning, Qamar, on waking up, looked around for the young woman and, not seeing her anymore, went to the servant and asked him, "Where's the girl? Where did you take her?" "Where's who? I don't understand what you are talking about, my prince," replied the servant. "You know what I'm talking about, of the one who slept with me last night. Where is she now?" Qamar insisted. "I swear to you I know nothing," replied the servant awkwardly. "And then, where would this girl have gone, since I was on guard at the door and did not see her?" "Do not lie to me. If you don't want me to cut your head off, tell me where she is," Qamar shouted, losing patience. The frightened servant protested again. My lord, believe me, no woman has been here." "Ah, there is no point in arguing with you. Have my father called. I want to talk to him," Qamar ordered. The servant obeyed, and Sultan Shahriman immediately arrived at the tower. "My father, I want to marry the beautiful girl you sent me last night," Qamar said to him. "What are you talking about? I didn't let you bring any girl. You must have dreamed," Shahriman replied. "I dreamed? Does this seem like a dream to you?" Qamar said, showing in impatience the ring on his finger. The Sultan looked at him in amazement and said, "I don't know what happened to your ring and where this came from, but believe me, my son, I would be happy to satisfy you if only I knew where the girl you are talking about is." Qamar despaired and laid down on the bed. The father, seeing him in those conditions and fearing for his health, brought him back to the palace again, granting him all the services and comforts. Despite this, Qamar became more and more sad as the days passed. He constantly thought of the princess, ate little, became pale, and lost weight visibly. and Budur? The next morning, she too, waking up and not seeing her loved one beside her, went to the older housekeeper and asked her, "Where's the handsome young man who slept in my arms last night?" "Oh, my lady, who are you talking about?" replied the housekeeper. "I'm talking about the young man who was here last night. Where did he go?" Budur asked again. "But I haven't seen any young man, believe me, princess," replied the housekeeper. Budur, angry, sent for her father, who immediately arrived. "My daughter, what happened to you?" Gayur asked. "I thank you, father, for the surprise you gave me last night. I will gladly agree to marry that handsome young man," Budur answered. The king, astonished, asked, "What surprise are you talking about? However, if you've made up your mind to get married, I'm more than happy. Who would you like to marry?" "And you ask me? I want to marry the one you had brought here last night," Budur replied impatiently. "But I didn't have anyone brought here," said the king. "Do you doubt what I tell you, father? Then see if you like this." And so saying, Budur stretched out her hand, showing him the man's ring that she was wearing on her finger. The king, unable to understand any of this, thought to himself, "Poor daughter, she's completely out of her mind. The captivity must have made her seriously ill." Fearing the worst, the king did not want to add anything else and regretted the misfortune that had happened to his daughter. Believing that she had lost her mind, Gayur brought doctors, astrologers, and magicians from all over China to seek treatment. But any attempt proved futile. One day, a famous doctor, after visiting Budur, said to the king, "My king, you called me to cure your daughter's madness, but she has no other disease than that of love, and only you can heal her, giving her the husband she wants." One day, Prince Marzawan, Budur's brother, arrived at the palace. He was a very educated person and was always travelling around the world in search of new knowledge. His education ranged from science to astronomy, from medicine to the arts. He was coming back from one of his long journeys and knew nothing about what had happened at court. The king told him of the sad condition in which his sister had fallen, and led him to the Silver Palace to meet her. As soon as Budur saw Marzawan, she embraced him with great joy and said to him, "My brother, I'm glad to see you after a long time. Everyone here thinks I'm crazy, but they are wrong. She told him her whole story in detail, right down to the ring exchanged for love. Marzawan listened in silence and at last said, "Beloved sister, if what you have told me is true and this beautiful young man exists, I promise you that I will turn the world until I have found him." That said, Marzawan left her and set forth the next day. He travelled for months, from city to city and island to island, interrogating everyone he encountered. One day, he arrived to Tairab, a large and populated seaside town, where he heard about a young prince who had fallen ill for the sake of a mysterious maiden. "Who is this prince, and where is he?" asked Marzawan to some of the inhabitants. "His name is Qamar, and he lives on Kalidan, an island off the Sea of Persia," they said. Marzawan immediately embarked on a ship bound for the island of Kalidan. Unfortunately, when they arrived near the port and were almost ready to get off to mainland, the ship was surprised by a strong storm, bumped into a rock, and sank rapidly. Luckily, Marzawan was a skilled swimmer and managed, albeit with difficulty, to reach the shores of Kalidan. Exhausted, he collapsed on a beach near Sultan Shahriman's palace. Marzawan was rescued and taken to Shahriman's court, where he was given a good meal and new clothes. He was then received by the Sultan's vizier, who asked him, "Who are you, and where do you come from, young stranger?" "My name is Marzawan. I come from China, and I am a great connoisseur of the arts, sciences, and medicine," he said. The vizier felt great esteem and admiration for him and added, "Would you know how to cure our Prince Qamar. He has long been afflicted by an evil that no one has been able to heal so far." "What's the disease?" asked Marzawan. "No one knows. He's always sad and vain, telling of a girl he met one night and then disappeared, leaving him a ring," the vizier replied. Marzawan had no doubts hearing these words, that the prince was the young man he was looking for, so he said to the vizier, "To better judge how to heal your prince, I need to see him. Take me to him." Marzawan was led into Qamar's room, where the prince was laying on the bed, with his eyes closed. Marzawan got near to him and said, "Let me sit next to you. I come from afar to tell you that she does not suffer less for your sake than you suffer for her sake." Qamar opened his eyes and exclaimed, "So you know her? Who are you?" "I am Prince Marzawan, son of Gayur, king of China. The girl you think of is a princess. Her name is Budur, and she's my sister. My mission is to bring you two together so that you can be freed from the unhappy situation in which you find yourselves," Marzawan said. He told him how much he knew about that whole story, so in detail that Qamar had no doubts about the authenticity of that account. Qamar felt his heart fill with joy, and in a flash, he resumed all his strength. Sultan Shahriman was immediately alerted of his son's recovery and rushed to his room. Seeing him fully recovered, he approached Marzawan and said to him, "Stranger, I don't know the miraculous medicine you have used to treat my son, but I am definitely grateful to you for taking him out of that deep melancholy." "King," Marzawan said, "to complete his recovery, Qamar will have to come with me to China. Only then will his pain end." The Sultan agreed and said to his son, "What is most dear to me is your happiness. Go ahead, but promise to come back as soon as possible." The next day, the two princes departed, and after a long journey by land and sea, they finally arrived at King Garyu's palace. Marzawan led Qamar there, but he did not reveal to anyone who he really was. The king went to meet his son, and after hugging him, said to him, "Marzawan, your sister is getting more and more sick, and I have no hope. Praise heaven that this return of yours will bring us the solution to the evil that afflicts this court." Marzawan brought Qamar closer and said, "This is a good doctor I met on the trip. I told him Budur's story, and he's here to heal her." "That's right, sire," Qamar added. "I think I have the right cure for your daughter." The king agreed, but since Budur received no one outside of his servants, the two princes designed a way to approach her. Qamar took a piece of paper and wrote the following words on it. "Adorable princess, I come to tell you that I have suffered much from that magical night when your beauty took hold of my heart. That's when I gave you my ring as a sign of love and took yours in return. I, a prisoner of passion, came from afar to pick you up as a wife. Your faithful lover, Prince Qamar." He then took off the exchanged ring and tucked it into the middle of the folded sheet. Marzawan ordered a servant to take it to the princess. Then they both went to the antechamber of her room and waited. Budur, as soon as she received the paper, opened it, and the ring slipped into her hands. As she saw it, her eyes lit up, and she immediately began to read the message. With a throbbing heart, she got out of bed and rushed out of the room where Qamar was waiting. The two embraced and kissed with all the strength of their love. The housekeeper, who had witnessed the sudden change in the princess, rushed to King Ghayur and said to him, "My lord, that doctor is the wisest of all. He healed your daughter without even going into her room." The king, pleasantly surprised, immediately went to Budur and hugged her. Then he turned to Qamar and said, "Lucky young man, I will be grateful to you all my life. Ask me anything, and I will please you." Qamar leaned towards the king and said, "Sire, forgive me if I have deceived you. Actually, I'm not a doctor. I just disguised myself as one to get closer to the princess. I am Prince Qamar, and my father, Sultan Shahriman, reigns on the island of Kalidan. I have come this far because it is my firm desire to marry your daughter." He then told him everything that had happened from the beginning to the end. King Ghayur was astonished and said to them, "Surely your history will be written in the books and will be read for centuries to come." The wedding ceremony took place the following day, and there were solemn events throughout China. Lunches were set up, and everyone sang and danced for a whole month. One night, Prince Qamar dreamed of his father, who in tears told him, "My son, you promised me to come back. Why did you abandon me?" When he woke up, he felt a great sadness and told Budur about his dream and then said, "My dear, I have not heard from my father for a long time and I want to see him again." The princess understood her groom's unhappiness, told King Kayur about it, and asked him for permission to go with Kamar to visit his father. The king told her, "My daughter, however sorry your departure may be, I cannot disapprove of this choice dictated by a son's love for his father. But promise not to stay away more than a year." "I promise you, father, we will be back in a year," Budur said. The next day, Kamar and Budur left for Kalidan Island. Upon their arrival, Sultan Shahriman welcomed them with great joy. Kamar told his father everything that had happened since he left the island to his wedding to Budur, including the fact that at the wishes of her father, they would have to return to China within a year. The Sultan organized a large party in their honor with banquets, dances, and music. In the midst of so much joy were invisible, even Maymunah and Dahnash, who, pleased, observed the two young lovers. "Of course, they're doing just fine together, aren't they?" said the fairy. "Yes, they are a wonderful couple, both beautiful and finally together and happy," added the genie, and they flew away to the woods.